Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Monday, October the 6th, 2025, and today we are talking about lemongrass and the basic principles of soil health because those pair nicely together. So let's do it. All right, happy Monday, everyone. I hope you all had nice weekends and that it went well and that they were successful, whatever that means for you. The youth soccer season still has a few more weeks, so it was still almost exclusively soccer for me, like truly from morning until night, both days. I even reffed a game, which is something I do from time to time, but it was definitely this weekend, which is good by me because it's a bunch of hanging out with my kids in the community, and I enjoyed that. Otherwise, not a lot of farmy or nature-y stuff this weekend so much. I was outside the whole time, but outside doing soccer. But the kids are out of school this week for fall break, and the temperatures look like they could also finally be out for fall break, whatever that means. So a hike may be in the forecast, but we'll see. It's about to go from hot to cool really fast. So someone can time me to see how long it takes for me to go from complaining about the heat to complaining about the cold. Sensing a new record this year. We'll see. All right, so something that has come up a few times in the last few weeks are the 3 principles of soil health. I find these principles incredibly handy because we get questions from all over the world about how to manage this or that type of soil in this or that type of condition, climate, etc. And obviously, I have not farmed in every area and on every soil type, though I have farmed on like 5 different farms at this point. So sometimes it feels that way. But as someone who talks a lot about farming and educates a lot on farming, though, it's good to have a unifying set of principles that apply no matter where you live. These are, to be sure, not my principles. These are the principles of conservation agriculture that have been defined in many different ways by many different people long before me, or you could just say these are principles that the soil designed themselves. But these are the principles I use to make the outline for the Living Soil Handbook, and they are the principles I follow as an ecologically minded grower. So over today and tomorrow, I'm going to dive into what these principles are, and then talk a bit about each one in their own segment and how to think about each one for your context. You've heard me say this a dozen times at this point, approximately, but the universal principles of soil health are keep the soil covered as much as possible, keep the soil planted as much as possible, and disturb the soil as little as you can. Some folks also add to that planting diversely as well, which I think is a fine principle. I usually add that to the keep it planted category, which we will talk about tomorrow. Another principle that folks will add is to incorporate livestock. This is not really one I focus on too heavily because animals are not always practical for market gardeners or backyard gardeners, especially in terms of direct incorporation. But if I was to add another principle, it would be to rely mostly on life-promoting inputs, which could indeed include animals or at least animal manures in the form of composts. Now, I will talk about each one of those individually, like I said, but what I love about these principles is that they are relevant in Canada as much as they are in the sandy lands of Florida, as much as they are in the mountains of Switzerland. Clay, sand, loam, rocky, or a mix of all 3, it really doesn't matter where you are or the types of soil that you're working on. Keeping the soil covered as much as possible, planted as much as possible, and disturbed as little as possible is universal, at least earthwide. We don't really know about the whole universe. I haven't spoken with any growers on any other planets yet. But effectively, these are the principles that themselves help to manage water, microbial life, and support soil health while also doing things like deterring erosion. So in the third segment, we will break down the idea of keeping the soil covered as much as possible and what that looks like in practice based on where you are. But first, let's take a little tea time with lemongrass. That sounds nice. BRB. Today's episode is brought to you by Farmhand. Renewal season is here, and the work you put in now is what brings members back next year. Ari Memar, founder of Farmhand and a guest you've heard on this podcast, has worked with regenerative farmers to create a playbook that turns renewal season into a growth season. One farmer, Melanie at Shake Fork Community Farm, brought in $40,000 in renewals in just 2 weeks using this strategy. Now, Ari and Melanie are sharing the exact approach in a free live workshop and downloadable playbook. Watch on demand and get the playbook at farmhand.partners/no-till. That's farmhand.partners/no-till. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this podcast, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere the questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes to us from Patreon member Terra Basics, Terra, not Tara. Anyway, who writes, quote, "Hi, my question is about lemongrass. Perhaps this was covered in a previous episode or message, but if not, I would like to explore the topic of overwintering. I've kept it, lemongrass, as a house plant, and it does okay. Well, maybe better than okay. It flowers in the late winter/spring, and I harvested the seeds in August. Hopefully they are viable. I have mostly grown it in the ground as an annual here in New Hampshire, Zone 5B. The story behind this, I was visiting my daughter and helping her to pack up her apartment. She is moving closer, yay. Her landlord lives on the floor above her, and they have a fantastic garden. It is the entire yard, including the area along the driveway. Amazing. The landlord couple are Chinese and do not speak any English. Their garden is amazing. They have lemongrass in 5-gallon buckets. This lemongrass is about 8 feet tall and thicker than my thumb. My daughter says they store the buckets of lemongrass in the basement over the winter, but she knows nothing else. Not being able to ask them because they don't speak English, I am reaching out to see if anyone else has overwintered pots of lemongrass in their basement or any other way, and what the results have been. Thanks for all you do. You are appreciated, end quote. Okay, so great. Thank you. And this is a fun question. And I actually didn't know the answer entirely because although like our Patreon member here, I've grown lemongrass for years as an annual just to have some soups and teas and such in the fall. I have not really tried to keep it over the winter. As a tropical grass, lemongrass does not, to be sure, just do that surviving over the winter job on its own here in Kentucky Zone 6B. It definitely never gets as thick as the lemongrass you can buy in the store. So I can't exactly speak from experience on this particular subject, but I took this as an opportunity to learn some things about lemongrass for my own future production, and will give you what I learned or what I know. Then perhaps we can all try it out this year and see what makes sense in our individual contexts. Get back together, talk about it later. For my context, like I said, I grow the lemongrass in the ground, typically in the field as an annual. This year, however, I wanted to put some in the tunnel just to see how big I could get it, which may have, in retrospect, been a little bit of a not the best placing because I have this big mass of lemongrass right as you enter the tunnel right now, and it is lush and green and kind of in the way. Lemongrass is, by the end of the season, even when grown as an annual, it gets huge. I remember a few years ago going to visit my buddy Jenny Love up in Philly, and she had a bed entirely, just like, I don't know, probably like 20 feet or something, entirely in lemongrass as a cover crop out in the field. And it was beautiful. Now, it does not grow fast enough to make it a reasonable cover crop in general, but if you can do it that way, harvest a bit for yourself, the lemongrass will then die over the winter and really enrich the soil for the spring. It's just a huge amount of biomass. However, if you live in a tropical region, it is not dying over the winter because it is, in its native habitat, Southeast Asia/India. It is indeed a perennial in those situations. Okay, so for me, for starters, I've been getting my seed from ufseeds.com. I think UF stands for Urban Farmer, who I want to say they're a small company based out of Indiana. So I get my seeds from them, and then I start those seeds usually in March. But I also read in a lemongrass primer from Utah State, quote, fresh stalks of lemongrass, leaves and roots absent, can be purchased at grocery stores specializing in Asian cuisine and will root in a glass of water in about 2 weeks, end quote. So that's interesting. I didn't know that. You can also buy starts from nurseries in some areas or probably online. So those may be a non-seed option if you don't want to grow for seed. But I've had good experiences growing it from seed, and I'm wondering if your seed, their Terra Basics, will work. For me, for seed, I start it fairly early, like I said, like mid-March in trays, and then transplant that after the last chance of frost. So like that would be like mid-May. It takes a while for it to grow, so I usually start it in bigger blocks, like the equivalent of a 128 cell tray or even a 72 cell tray. So effectively, those are like inch by inch or 2 inch by 2 inch blocks. It needs pretty warm temperatures to germinate, and then it needs pretty warm temperatures to grow. And I grow it as tall as I can until that point, like after a last frost. And then I plant it in the soil in clumps that should be like 2 to 3 feet apart. But if you plan to plant it in pots, you will need pretty large pots for this plant with a wide enough base to keep it upright, because a plant as tall as lemongrass, and it definitely gets tall, will absolutely blow over if it's in a pot. Now, it is my understanding that you can indeed also dig up the plant at the end of the season, cut it back, and then store it in pots over the winter. So instead of growing it entirely in a pot, you're growing it in the ground and then moving it to a pot. But again, I've not tried that, nor have I tried just growing it in pots and cutting it back and then keeping it in my house or basement. The basement, if dark, is going to cause dormancy if it's cold enough. If you place it near a window, the lemongrass will grow. So I think either is fine. Though what you wouldn't want to do is to have it in a warm basement where it will grow without sunlight, because then you would get, that legginess, sort of a leggy, worn out plant by the time the warmth returns in the spring. You also wouldn't want to harvest any growth that occurs if you're keeping it by a window. Just keep it, lightly trimmed maybe. And then by the spring, or at least by August, like you said, it probably will flower. But by the spring, you should be able to replant it or repot it. And if you keep it fairly fertile and well watered throughout the years, you should get 4 to 6 years out of a plant. And the stems will will only get thicker and thicker year after year, or at least that's my understanding. And if it does indeed go to seed, you should, in theory, be able to use those seeds as long as they're pollinated. Now, it may take 8 months or so before the lemongrass is thick enough to really bother with cutting, but we usually cut it pretty low on the stalk, like at the ground level, picking the bigger stalks first and then coming back for the smaller ones later, kind of letting them grow. Then it can be used, fresh or to flavor socks or soups or rices or teas or ferments, candles, I don't know, whatever you want to flavor. I don't know that you really flavor candles. I guess you scent those, but I guess you could flavor a candle. I'm not judging. As for overwintering the field, lemongrass cannot survive a freeze. So unless you live in the tropics, even in a tunnel, it's going to be a challenge to keep it going. But I'm not going to lie. I may even try just, to protect it a little bit, see what happens. Anyway, let us know what your lemongrass strategy is. I love the way it looks and I love having it around and then having a little bit in soups and teas and stuff in the winter. It's also a fun addition to the market table if you get some bunches of lemongrass harvested in time. And in fact, finding a way to overwinter it might be the ticket to having big stocks of lemongrass for the market by mid to late summer. That could be really cool, frankly. Indeed, let us know your thoughts. And in the meantime, we're going to take a quick break. When we return, we will cover keeping the soil covered for redundancy's sake. Be right back.
Farmer Claire Coleman here from the Winter Growers Podcast. Did you know that I also founded Real Farmer Care, a nonprofit that supports farmer well-being? From my own experiences farming, I knew firsthand that this type of support was missing from ag, so I decided to do something about it. As of today, there are over 500 farmer recipients of a $100 self-care award, with more applying daily. If you'd like to help, each $100 donated supports one new farmer. Visit realfarmercare.com to donate and learn more. Again, that's realfarmercare.com.
All right, so although they are in no particular order, let's really dive into each principle, and starting with principle number 1 today, keeping the soil covered as much as possible. The idea here is obviously mulching, but mulching can mean different things in different contexts and for different economic scenarios. For instance, straw and hay should be used differently in colder regions than warmer ones, especially when it comes to, commercial gardening where slowing down the soil because it's too cool, like it can be under lightly colored mulches, can dramatically limit the garden's performance, which itself can cost you serious revenue as a grower. Like if you put your tomato transplants into really cold soil and they don't produce for an extra month later than everybody else's, that's not great. Moreover, the type of hay and or straw can have positive or incredibly negative effects on a garden, depending on if it's loaded with weed seeds or if it's still green, if it's been sprayed with an herbicide, and so on. All of those will have different effects. Anyway, let's talk about what the mulches bring into the picture, and then we can discuss more of those nuances. Depending on the mulch and how it's applied, mulches help to keep the soil from blowing or washing away. That is a huge bonus because losing topsoil means losing microbes, nutrients, and moisture. In fact, moisture is another part of the mulch picture. Mulches help to trap moisture in the soil in a way that greatly benefits the microbes, not just by your plant, but all through the soil surface, plus the plants and larger soil life like worms, beetles, and so on. Water is the key to life, and for soil, plants and mulches are the key to water management. Mulches also act as food that microbes and others can live on, feed on, and turn into plant nutrients and soil aggregates, which in turn feed the plants again. A short list of mulches include compost, cover crop residue, grass clippings, chopped leaves, wood chips potentially, hay, straw, marsh hay, which is a nice option if you can get it because the bulk of the weed seeds require salt to germinate, cardboard, paper mulch, burlap, and then you get into things like plastic mulches, which are good for moisture retention and heat management, but break down into soil harming materials like microplastics rather than soil feeding ones like organic matter. I may in fact do an entire series on each mulch at some point because there are a lot of mulches out there and a lot of nuances to each of those mulches. But the basic thing to think about here is what is available to you and what your goal is. Like I said, not every mulch makes sense in every region or for every crop or at least every time of year. That will depend on where you are and what you have access to. Mulches will cool the soil down. So if you have straw or hay as your mulch option and you trust the source, but you live in a cold area, wait until the soil has warmed enough to employ such a mulch. Or think of ways to warm the soil beneath the mulch before planting, like we used to dig our tomato holes a day or two before planting into a mulch in the early spring to allow that hole to warm up a bit before the transplant would be placed into it. You don't want to put your tomato transplant into cold soil. Alternatively, you could mulch areas for strict summer crops with lightly colored mulch, and then other areas you could manage differently with like a darker colored mulch or a light compost mulch or something like that. It happens a lot to people in northern, in our hemisphere, northern means colder areas. Growers will mulch heavily with hay or straw only to have poor performance all summer because the soil there just never really gets to a good working temperature. Compost mulches are nice because they can warm the soil a bit, but in hot summer times of year, that can also cause issues. Those lighter mulches can also be nice in situations like direct seeding, where carrots or some other seeded crop can more easily be put into the soil versus hay or straw, where, it's not as easy to seed into them because, there's straw or hay in the way. So sometimes it's about matching the mulch to the crop, the climate, and the goals. I love leaves, for instance, but they really keep the soil cool, and they're not always great around salad mixes. So we reserve leaves for taller crops or just for making compost, and usually just after we've planted them into warmer soil. I'm not going to guide you here on plastic mulches, partly because I think those are something we need to move away from, but if it's something you feel you have to use, they can likewise warm the soil and retain that moisture, whereas something like burlap may be more likely to cool the soil and eventually, possibly feed the soil once it breaks down. Anyway, them's the basics on mulches, but like I said, I would love to and could easily, I think, do a more in-depth breakdown of each, even beyond what I did in the Living Soil Handbook at some point soon, so be on the lookout for that. Otherwise, Monday, I think we're done here, friends. Don't forget, No Till Growers is now officially a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. You can learn more about how to do that and maybe get an end-of-the-year tax break in our show notes. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. It's an easy way to help us out. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors, and if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a hat or a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, at notillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, you sign up in the month of October, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Starlight Farm and Preserve, Chris Couch. I almost read that as Chris Coach or Coach Chris, but I'm going to assume it's actually Chris Couch because that's what it says. And Derek Leggy. Sorry, Derek. I did try. All right, so today's story is about someone named Marianne. Some things you should know about Marianne. First, she does not like the water, like at all. Not basically any form. She had a bad experience as a kid, falling into a pool, and she just never liked water beyond the requisite water, like washing your hands and taking a shower. So that means, and this is fact number 2 about Marianne, she does not like fishing. Fact number 3, not a fan of the show Gilligan's Island, and not just because all of the water in the show, and not just because there was, a character named Marianne, but also because she didn't think it was very funny. And also she's a millennial, so it's just a little bit ahead of her time. So it just wasn't her sense of humor. So all of these facts were really buzzing around in Marianne's head shortly after she woke up alone on a fishing boat in the middle of some unidentified mass of water. No memory of how she got there or why, but that is for tomorrow on A Hard Row to Sow. Get it? Because it's rowing? I don't know if it has to do with sewing, but we'll find out. Thanks for watching and or listening. We'll see you then. Bye.